Hi guys. I'm trying to make sure you can hear me. So if anyone can hear me, go ahead and type something in the chat box. Oh, lots of things just popped up. Okay, hold on. Hi, Connor. Connor, you're not in my class. Is this a different Connor? Okay. I'm just trying to review. Okay. All right. All right. So this is for tomorrow's test, which is Unit 2, what we've been doing for the last 2 weeks. And I went through and I made a list of all the different points for the questions. And the test is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. There's 5 FRQs, and then there's 2 extra credit questions at the end. So 5 FRQs, 2 FRQ extra credit questions, and the test is 37 total points available between those 5 FRQs. So they're all worth different amounts. And I made a list of the different topics that will be on there. And I hope I spelled that right. And then I wanted to just answer questions as they came up, or if you had them. I'm trying to make sure I spell that right. Yeah. Okay. So here's the list. Is that long enough to take a screenshot? Oh man, the flashbacks. Tax incidents, not indication, incidents. But yes, I'm going to talk about tax incidents because we didn't get to it today in class. And I think we need to. Actually, we did in 5th hour, but not in 3rd hour. And we need to make sure we understand tax incidents. There's one other hint just for you guys that pay attention. So for those of you who know how old I am, you know what year that question comes from. All right. So Elijah said tax incidents. So I'm going to start with that one. Today, when we were working on the elastic and inelastic demand curves compared to supply, we were comparing the taxes on the different the tax incidence, the tax burden on the different consumer and producer groups, depending on the elasticity of demand for that product and how that influenced who paid what. So that is what we're talking about when we say tax incidence. It's who pays how much of the tax. So if it's a 20-cent tax or a 15-cent tax, who's paying that tax? So we have to make sure we know how to read this on a graph. Now I'm going to try and see if I have one already drawn so I don't have to draw a new one for you. Here we go. All right. So this one might work right here. Okay. Incidence. All right. So on this graph right here, when we're looking at it, we can see that from P1 to P2, that tax is paid by the consumer because it is touching the consumer surplus, or it's removed from the consumer surplus. And down here, you can see it's only a small amount that's paid by the consumer. A much larger amount is going to be paid by the producer here. Okay. So I'm going to graph this out in color because that one was not in color. Right. Does anyone remember the question from? Oh, you're welcome, Dylan. Valentine's Day is a fake holiday, so I don't really care about having a test on that day. All right. My boys are not sleeping. They're very, very loud right now. All right, so I'm going to start with my supply and demand curve, and I've labeled equilibrium. All right, now if we add a tax to this graph, our supply curve is going to move, and it's going to shift to the left because supply shifts left less when a tax is involved. So I'm going to shift my supply curve to the left, and I labeled it ST for supply with a tax. Shift it to the left. Now I'm going to find my new quantity at the tax and price at the tax. All right. So you can see that price went up, quantity went down. Okay. But the question is, how did this change our total revenue and total expenditure, and who gets to keep how much money? So originally in this like periwinkle color box, this much money went to the business owner because they didn't pay taxes and they got to keep it all. But now that the government has come in and said, no, you're going to pay a tax on this product, they are going to have to give some of that profit to the government. So now we're going to look at their new income. This was their old income. Their new income is going to be this dark purple box, right? Your new quantity and your new price. All right, so the dark purple would be what we have now, right? So that light purple was before the tax, and the dark purple is after the tax. Now, when we're trying to see how much do the business actually get to keep, because this doesn't look like the business lost that much money, but you have to remember, they don't get to keep it all. The government is going to take a cut, and the business only gets to keep what's left over. So the question becomes, what is left over, and what does the government take? Well, to find out the difference, we use our new quantity, which was QT, and here's the new quantity, which is QT, and we're going to go up and we're going to find two different points along that line, 2 different points. The first point I'm looking at is the intersection of that QT and the original supply curve, your original supply curve, which is, I'm going to make it a black dot. You can see that black dot. And then I'm going to switch to red because you guys told me today in class that the government makes you angry, so it should be red. Now I'm going to go QT all the way up to my new equilibrium and make that a red dot. So I have my black dot. You can't really tell it's red. Black dot here, red dot here. Now I'm going to take those dots over to find my price. Okay. So my government price is PT. My business price is going to be I take that black dot where QT hits the supply curve, and I bring it over to my price. I labeled it price for the business, PB. You can label it whatever you want, unless it's already labeled for you. So now you're looking at PT and PB. Well, the price with the tax and the price the business get are different. So the consumer is going to pay this price up here, and then that amount is going to get split between the business and the government. Now, the government is going to take the top part that's the government's box. And then the business is going to keep the bottom. So the business gets what's in black and the government gets what's in red. Now, you guys are texting me on Remind at the same time. You gotta stop. Okay. So now with that, you can see that your original periwinkle box that was way up here is now this little black box. So the tax actually hurt the company a lot more than you might have thought originally when you were just comparing two rectangles. So the business only gets the black box compared to that periwinkle color they originally had. Now that's just how you find out the tax versus the revenue of a business and the government. The other thing we have to keep in mind, or the other thing we have to look for, is the incidence. How much of that red box is borne by the consumer and how much is the result of a producer. So now I need another color that can show up over the red. I have dark color. Okay, so to split this red box in half, this is where it gets tricky. We have to look at our original equilibrium point, which was right there, okay, that PE, and draw that line. So I'm going to just darken up PE, make that PE line dark. We had made that originally. I didn't draw anything new. I just made it dark, okay? Now everything above PE is borne by the consumer, and everything below PE is borne by the producer, okay? So for this graph that I just made up in my head, the consumer surplus is this amount right here at top, and the producer incidence is that box down there, okay? So you split your government tax box, the red box, based on your original equilibrium line, and you determine who is paying the tax from that line. So that is the stuff we did today in 3rd and 5th, and it's also the rest of that page that you guys have to do as well is there. I don't know if the chat's not working or no one has questions, but I don't see any. So I'm just going to hang tight for a minute. Jovan, okay. I'm glad you asked. Consumer and producer surplus. I wanted to send this link. Let me copy this link. Hold on. This is a link to Mr. Clifford. I'm going to post here. That is Mr. Clifford's YouTube list on all the micro Unit 2 topics. So you can go through those if you want to, or look at different things. But just quickly, consumer and producer surplus are found on a graph. Okay. Supply and demand. Equilibrium. Consumer surplus is the amount consumers are willing and able to pay above equilibrium price, above the price. So to find our consumer surplus, we find our equilibrium price. I'm going to make it purple. Okay. And then we take it all the way to demand. All right. And then we just close that triangle. All right. So that triangle is our consumer surplus. Consumer surplus. Okay, now our producer surplus would be on the opposite side because it's what producers are willing and able to produce below equilibrium price. So we're going to find our equilibrium point price. I'm making it turquoise. Right? I'm going to take it all the way to supply because producers supply things. Right? And I'm closing the triangle. And you guys all remember the formula to find these things is the area of the triangle. So to find either of those, you'd have to do 1/2 base times height. All right. And then also, Jovan, I put the that link to that YouTube channel. That's Mr. Clifford. And he has a ton of videos on there, including consumer and producer surplus, dead weight loss. Oh, excuse me. And he also goes into tax incidents on there as well. So that's also one that's on there. All right. How would an FRQ include price ceiling and floors? Okay, so it will, let me see. Give me a second. I dropped all the pins on top of my test. This one is not ceiling and floors. No. Okay, question 4 is ceilings and floors. It gives you a graph and it asks if there's a price floor, would this make a surplus, a shortage, or neither, and why? If there's a price ceiling, is there a surplus, a shortage, or neither, and why? And then on this one, nope, that's this one. Oh, this one says like, if there is a price floor, how many units would consumers buy or producers produce? That kind of question. And this is not one. And some FRQs, sometimes Sebastian asks you to draw one. I didn't see that on here because I don't think that's on here. I don't think we're drawing them this time. I don't think. I'd have to reread it in detail. So Sebastian, let me know if that helps. Elijah, oh, market failures. We only talked about one kind of market failure. I think so far it was externalities. No, we talked about externalities and dead weight loss. I think we talked about 2. So Unit 2, Part 1, last page was on externalities, if I recall correctly. And yes, Emma, I will. And so let me pull up that page because I want to make sure I'm not mixing up my ACE and AP econ in my head right now. So our externalities, we did marginal social benefit and marginal social cost and private benefit and private cost. I think that's what we did in AP. I promise as soon as I get to the page, I'll confirm. And then what you have to do is you have to know the difference. See, we did property rights. Yes. So like we talked about externalities. So like chemicals and pollution are negative externalities where the MSC is greater than MPC, where social cost is greater than private cost. And then we talked about positive externalities where social benefit is greater than private benefit. So positive, the benefits are higher. Negative, the costs are higher. So those are the market failures we talked about. And we talked about deadweight loss, which is another type of market failure. So they're both types of market failures. A market failure is simply when we don't produce at the optimal output. And obviously with deadweight loss, we're not optimal. And with externalities, we're not doing what society wants. We're doing what's best for us, but not what's best for society. So that's another failure. Elijah, let me know if that helped. Dylan, the FRQs are all kind of different. They're all kind of different. I showed you the list at the beginning. I'm losing my mind. Where'd that list go? No, she's Louise. Oh, here it is. Hold on. And this is the list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you can see this list has 8 bullet points on it, I think. Oh my goodness. These boys will not stop screaming. There's only 5 questions and the 2 extra credit. So there's 8 bullet points on here because some of the questions have different things, but that's that. So they're all kind of different. Hold on 1 second. Go to bed. You there now. Silence. Understood? All right. Okay. So, all right. Where was I? Okay. Elasticities. Okay. Elasticities all over the test. I think a lot of the questions have it on there. This one talks about elasticity. 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 Yeah, you have a lot of elasticity, a lot of calculate the price elasticity of demand, calculate the price elasticity of supply, or cross price elasticity, or is this elastic or inelastic, or the total revenue test, if it's elastic and the price goes up, what happens to total revenue, that kind of thing is, it's going to come up a lot, elasticity. So you need to know the formula, which is percent change in quantity divided by percent change in price. And then you also need to know the ranges. So you need to know that for price elasticity of demand, PED, and price elasticity of supply, PES, if it's greater than 1, it's elastic, equal to 1 is unitary, less than 1 is inelastic. And then you also need to know that cross price elasticity, if the coefficient is less than 0, it's a complement. And if it's, if it's negative, it's a complement. And if it's positive, it's a substitute. And for income elasticity of demand, normal and inferior goods. So those are the ones you need to know, the ranges and all of those. So that's the elasticity. And then Emma asked me to talk about deadweight loss. Deadweight loss is found in a graph. For example, I'm going to go back to this first one I drew. We know the red box is the government's box. We know the black box is the business box. And we know that the top of the red goes to the consumer's paying. The bottom of the red, the producer is paying. Now, remember this. We used to have this big periwinkle box. We used to have this big producer surplus here and this big consumer surplus up here. But now that's all gone because of the tax, because of government involvement. When the government gets involved, we have market failures. And the market failure we have right here, what is it?
Birds talking when they can't fall asleep.
Say hi, Donovan.
Hi.
Get a drink of water and go in bed.
But I can't sleep.
Then go sleep in the other room.
Victoria?
Yeah, go sleep in Victoria's room.
Okay.
Good night. Okay. So when he's yelling at the 2-year-old to be quiet. It's really funny. It's not going to work, but it's funny. Okay. Where was I? Here. Okay. So we have red boxes. The government's tax. Top is paid by the consumer. Bottom is paid by the producer. We have this little triangle. This triangle out here. I can't do brown. Let's get a different color. How about orange? Use orange. I'm going to try and make sure you can see as I see. All right. So this triangle going to what used to be equilibrium but is no longer. This is our deadweight loss. That little orange triangle right there. All right. It's the amount that society will no longer get because of the interference of the government in the market. So now we have lost that value in society. We've lost that surplus. That's no longer. So that's called deadweight loss. And then if I wanted to identify deadweight loss, I could either graph it like this or color it in or shade it, that triangle. Or sometimes they'll ask you to identify a box based on its coordinates. So we'd use the corners of the triangle. They'll give each spot a letter and tell you how to identify those. Okay? All right. Oh my God, now the baby's screaming. This is not going to go well. This is why I normally don't start till 10. Because this is going to keep happening. All right. I want to look at the list. I talked about market failures. I talked about tax incidents. I talked about ceilings and floors. I talked about elasticity. I talked about deadweight loss. I talked about consumer and producer surplus. Make sure you know how to graph. Make sure you know how to draw a graph. Make sure you know how to label all the axes on your graph and your supply curve and your demand curves correctly. If you don't label, you don't get points. Make sure you show your work when you're doing math. And I just found out tonight when I was doing some research that the AP exam is no calculator. So no calculators tomorrow. All the math can be done in your head. So there's that. And that's so fun. The other thing I wanted to say is make sure you understand utility and marginal utility per dollar, marginal utility per dollar. Right. Okay. The perfectly elastic and perfectly inelastic. I happen to have Marina, my book, open to that page right here. All right. So now you have these two graphs, right? You're looking at those two graphs and you're trying to find the new equilibrium quantity and new equilibrium price and then the tax incidence. Let me see if I have a pencil to draw on this. All right. So before the tax are, for those of you that didn't finish it yet, this is Unit 2, Part 2. And it's question number 7 on the second to last page. That's where we're at. So right here, it says before tax, your equilibrium was 200 million and 25 cents, and then you added that 15-cent tax, shifting your supply curve to the left. And so before tax, your total expenditure was 50 million. It's 200 million times 25 cents. It's 50 million. But after tax, your equilibrium on the perfectly inelastic graph, your equilibrium quantity is going to stay the same because you have a vertical a vertical, what is this line? Vertical line for your demand curve. So your quantity didn't change, but what happened is your equilibrium price changed. It intersected S sub t at 40 cents. So now your total expenditure is 80 million. Okay, revenues the producers still get to keep that original 50. Okay, because your original supply curve intersects that point. So that means the balance is paid by the consumer. So that means 100% of that tax was paid by the consumer on a perfectly inelastic vertical demand curve. So that's this one. Paid by the consumer. And this one is going to be paid by the producer. Perfectly elastic, because if the producer changes its price, then people quit buying. So the producer either has to pay the whole tax themselves or lose their business. Those are their choices. So for this one, you had 225 cents right here. Right? So this is your original total revenue box right there. Okay. And now at this tax, we're right here. Okay. So that means that the consumer spending is going to be 12.5. Right? That's 50 times 25 cents. And that means that you come down here to the supply curve, this little box right here, 10 cents and 50 units. That's the producer's part. And then up here, this is the government's take. Okay. Government, producer. All right, Marina. All right. So I hope that answered your question, Marina. Let me know. Emma, yes, 5 FRQs, and then there's 2 extra credit FRQs on the back. So there's 5 in the test, 2 as extra credit, 7 total. But an FRQ has multiple parts. They're worth anywhere from 5 to 10 points each question. Is there a way I can do a practice FRQ from a topic? Sure, I'll do one, but I'm not doing one off the test. LOL at you. So what I can do here, I'm going to pull up the AP Micro FRQs. All right. Give me a second. I have tabs open right now. Okay. So, Tazelia and Sebastian, you guys asked, give me a year, pick a year, any year. Type a year in the box. And that's the year I'm going to open and grab an FRQ from. (2014), phenomenal. Okay, so I am on that AP Central College Board website. I posted it on each of your Google Classroom at the top of the classwork page, so you can go there too. It's not hidden at all. It's under course resources. It says FRQs, and there's a link to AP Central. On that, I'm going to open up the 2014 exam and click on FRQs. And I'm going to open one and see what it says. Hopefully there's one from Unit 2 on there. We'll see. There's only 5 units, so odds are in our favor. Okay, so number 1 is Unit 3. We're going to get there next unit. Number 2 is Unit 4. And number 3. Okay, I can do number 3. 2014 AP exam number 3. That's what I'm going to do right now. Gas is sold in a competitive market where demand is relatively inelastic and supply is relatively elastic. 3A, draw this graph. That sounds fun. All right, so I've got my price axes, and I got to use pen because you're not going to be able to see that. That's broken. I'm a hot mess right now. All right, price, quantity, okay, and it says demand is relatively inelastic and supply is relatively elastic. Okay. Show equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. QE and PE. Okay, so this would be 3A from 2014. I can't say if you can see because I'm not looking at YouTube. Okay, so that would be 3A. It told me demand was relatively inelastic, so I made my curve very, very steep. And supply is relatively elastic, so I made it more horizontal. Now, it did not say perfect, so they're not straight because only perfect lines are straight. Relatively are almost. And then it said label your equilibriums QE and PE. So that'd be 3A. Now 2014, 3B. If the government imposes a $2 per unit tax on the producers of gasoline, show each of the following after the tax is imposed. Oh, this is phenomenal, you guys, because this is exactly what we're talking about. All right, so I have to graph my new supply curve. I'm going to label it ST. Okay, so there's my new supply curve. I'm going to make sure you can see it on YouTube. I have to flip my screen. So there's my new supply curve, okay? So now on this curve, this one says, show each of the following. On your graph, show each of the following. The price paid by buyers, and label it P sub B. So the price paid by buyers is up here. Price paid by buyers. Does everyone see that? Right, the new equilibrium price. Okay. The after-tax price received by sellers. So how much does the seller get to keep out of this? So I'm going to show you how I find this number. So when the buyers pay this much, but that is not how much the sellers get to keep. They have to pay the government. So I have to take my equilibrium point right there, my intersection, and drop it down until I hit the old supply curve. That determines my price. So I'm going to drop this line down. And now this is going to determine the price my sellers get to keep. I labeled that PS. Price for my sellers is PS. And then it says the quantity labeled QT. Okay, so I'm going to label my quantity QT for quantity at the tax. And that's right there. Okay. And now, oh, you guys, this is so funny. So I did B in pink. Now I have to do 3C. 3C says, using the labeling on your graph, explain how to calculate the total tax revenue collected by the government, which I think is exactly what I just showed you in the book a minute ago. To find out how much the government would keep, we would look at our total expenditure or total revenue, which is price times quantity, right? And then we would figure out the tax the government gets to keep is the distance between what the buyer pays and what the seller keeps, okay? So for C, I would write I'm going to look at what the question says again. Total tax revenue received. The total tax revenue received by the government would be the difference between the buyer's price and the price the sellers keep. Times, or multiplied by, would probably be better than times, the quantity at the tax. Right? That would be how I found the tax revenue. And it's the area of this rectangle right here. I'm just going to color it in this golden color. That golden rectangle would be the amount of the tax. All right. And now D, will the tax burden fall entirely on buyers, entirely on sellers, more on buyers and less on sellers, more on sellers and less on buyers, or equally? Explain. Okay. So just like I was saying before, this golden box is going to be my tax revenue, but we don't care only about the box. It's important, but we also have to care about our original equilibrium price. So if you remember our original equilibrium price, PE, right there, I'm going to make it darker so we can see. Now you can see here, when that line is dark, that the tax box paid by the consumer, right, the part on the top of that price, is much larger than the bottom. So this tax burden would fall heavier on the consumer than on the producer. And it's going to do that because demand is relatively inelastic. Because that line is so steep, it doesn't matter what you charge, people will still have to buy it, right? Just like insulin or medicine or necessities, people still have to pay for them, even if they're expensive. So that's why you know the consumer is going to pay more of the burden. And that would be full points on 3D. On 3D. So there you go. Do you draw a supply curve wherever you want? Kind of. It depends on what it tells you. Like I drew this supply curve like this because it told me in the question that supply was more elastic. So I made it like this. Otherwise, I traditionally, if it does not tell me not to, I always draw my P, Q, S, and D. Unless I am told otherwise, I always draw mine like that as an X. That's just kind of how I always place it. And then you'll notice I do it in class too, out of habit. My S is almost always lined up with the origin. It's kind of how I space it, and my demand is corner to corner. And I only do that to make it neat. If I'm told in the question otherwise, like that it needs to be elastic or inelastic or something like that, I'll adjust accordingly. But traditionally, that's how I'm going to draw my supply and demand graph. Let me know if that helps you or not. All right. Sebastian, did you have a different test you want me to pull a question from? I think it's phenomenal you guys picked that, and it just happened to be exactly like tax incidence. Is it going to tell us tomorrow? I don't know if there's any hold on. Explain. Okay, draw a graph. This one you just have to draw the graph, so you can just make it like this for number one. It's not sloped any particular way. This one. Ooh, good question, Dylan. There's a tricky one right here. Number one, you're going to have to draw two different graphs. One is a normal graph, like this. One of them is a graph, and it says supply is perfectly elastic. Supply is perfectly elastic. So you got to figure out what a supply curve looks like when it's perfectly elastic. All right. This one doesn't say graph. Oh, this one's math. This one already gives you the graph. You just have to find the stuff on the graph. This one gives you the graph already. Identify. That one's not graphing. Yeah, so that's it. Azalea, you make me so happy. You are correct. Yes. If it's perfect, yes, it would. Perfectly elastic. But here's the trick, Azalea. If you draw a perfectly elastic supply line, right, straight line, what's your demand curve look like? Oh my God. How across it? What's a demand curve look like? No, Elijah, it should not be vertical. All right, so that's my normal one, right? That's normal. Get a different color. Where do I put demand? Demand would stay the same. Unless you're told otherwise, demand stays the same. Downward sloping, diagonally. (2010). All right, let me see. This is, I feel like it's almost like roulette because I don't even know what the questions are going to be. Oh, this question's really long. I don't think I'm going to do this one. It's like a 10-point question here. Economic profit in the short run, side-by-side graphs. That's next unit. So number 1 is unit 3. Number 2, profit maximizing firm in a perfectly competitive market. Side-by-side graphs is unit 3. We're not there yet. And oh, this is good. Number 3. Okay, 2010, number 3. So if you want to follow along with the question, you guys know where to find it. If you just want to watch me make a fool of myself, that's fine too. Okay. Sebastian, this is a great one because there is a question that asks you to use the labeling. There's a question on the test tomorrow that will ask you to use the labeling to decipher areas, and this question does. Okay, so I'm on 2010 FRQ question number 3. It says, this graph above shows the perfectly competitive market for hard candies in country alpha. In the graph, the letters correspond to points, not areas. So MPC denotes marginal private cost, which is your supply curve. MSB denotes marginal social benefit. which is our demand curve. So it says use the labeling on the graph and identify the areas representing each of the following at market equilibrium. So if our market equilibrium is point M, P3 and Q3, 3A says to identify the consumer surplus. You guys are going to have to open up the question because I'm not redrawing this whole graph. It's a lot, but I'm going to write your answers. So your consumer surplus would be from P3 to point M and then up to point J. It would be written like this. And this is the I'm going to label it. This is the 2010 AP FRQ 3. That's what I'm doing. This isn't on the test. This is just reviewing for the test. All right. Number 2, 3A part 2, the producer surplus. Well, you label it the same way. I go P3 to M down to point P1. Okay. And to find those, all I did is I looked at each point on the triangle. So I just gave the coordinate of each point on the triangle. 3B, assume the production of each unit creates a negative externality. Oh, no. 3B. Equal to P5 minus P2. Okay. We have a negative externality from P5 to P2. Ooh, that's a big externality. Okay. So using the labeling on the graph, identify the socially optimal quantity. So it's our efficient quantity. So you would want to find where private benefit. So then we would want to be at this coordinate. We have to look at the difference between the two. And if we want to produce where it's socially optimal, that would be where MSB equals MSC. So our MSB equals MSC at point K. Now, it doesn't ask for point K. It's going to ask for a quantity. So we would have to say Q sub 1. Q sub 1. And then I'm hoping you guys are seeing how different these are from your government FRQs, because I don't think Mr. Dahlman would ever let you turn in this as a correct answer on a government FRQ. All right. Now, if the government institutes a tax of P5 minus P2, that's a big tax, to correct this negative externality, identify the area for each of the following. Okay, so it wants to know if we institute a tax that's the value of P5 to P2, that distance, our new supply curve is going to run through point K. So that means that our producer surplus and our consumer surplus are going to change drastically, right? Our consumer surplus is going to fall to JKP5. JKP5. So C, J, K, and P5. It'd be that little teeny triangle at the top. And dead weight loss would be KRM. KRM. No. Here. Tax. All right. There. Okay. So that is 2010. Okay, Celia, because it told me that there's a negative externality and the value is P5 minus P2. So that means that society is being harmed by that distance from P5 minus P2, that value, whatever it is the cost to society, or the private cost. So what that means to me is that we need to find where our MSC would be, because they gave you MPC and they gave you MSB. So you need to find where MSC, your social cost, would be. And the social cost is going to be at if that externality is subtracted. All right, so we're going to have to take into account that externality, and that would put us at point K. At point K. And at point K is the only point along that MSB curve, your demand curve, where you can get the negative externality covered by the company. And that means that we're producing at quantity Q1. All right. All right, guys, it's 1 minute till 10. So I'm going to head to bed. Unless someone has another question for me. You should feel good for the test tomorrow. It'll be good. You'll do good. You'll do good. All right. Nothing last minute? All right, guys, then I'm going to sign out. Have a good night. Don't stay up all night studying. Go to bed. Get some rest. All right. Good night, guys.